Hi, I'm Donna Kelce, Taylor Swift's mother-in-law. On Thursday afternoon, my daughter-in-law called me and asked me to say something on her behalf that she cannot say herself. That has never happened before. 3 years. She has never once asked me to say anything about anything to anybody. She said, "You make videos, Donna. About 4 million women over 60 listen to them." She said, "I want to say one thing to those women, and I have got no way to say it." And I said, "You have got every way to say it." And Taylor Swift said, "No, I haven't." She said, "If I say it, it's a statement. It goes everywhere, and somebody writes about what I meant by it." She said, "If you say it, it's a woman in a kitchen in Ohio telling her friends something." So there is a thing at the end of this that is hers and not mine, and I asked her twice whether she was sure, and she said yes both times. It is about Dolly Parton, and it is a correction, and it is the reason this video exists. But first I have to tell you about Tuesday night, because I found out on Thursday morning what my daughter-in-law actually did on Tuesday, and my son did not know either until Wednesday. She watched it alone. She watched a minute of film of a woman who had been alive 6 weeks earlier, on her own, at 6 o'clock in the evening, 4 hours after the news came out. And she did not tell anybody she had done it, not her husband, not anybody, because she knew exactly what he would do. And then she sat down and wrote 400 words in 40 minutes, and there is a typo in it, and nobody on this earth has noticed, and she is not going to fix it. When my son asked her why, she said 5 words that I have not been able to put down since Thursday morning. And at some point that night, while all of that was happening 4,000 miles away, during the busiest week of his professional year, at 36 years old, without telling a single person at the facility what he was doing, Travis got on a plane. He did not call ahead. He turned up at midnight, and she was furious with him for about 4 seconds, and then she was not, and then he sat down and asked her about a dog. That is what this is. Now let me tell you what happened on Tuesday, and what a woman of 80 did 6 weeks earlier that nobody thought anything of at the time. She died on Tuesday, in Nashville, 80 years old. Her family said it was after a brief battle with cancer, and her team put out a statement that said she spent her life bringing joy and laughter and hope and integrity into everything she touched. That is true, and it is the sort of thing that gets said, and in this case it also happens to be simply factual. 6 weeks before that, in July, she made a video. It was about a minute long. She was thanking my son and his wife for a donation of $2 million to the Imagination Library, which is the program she started in 1995 that has sent free books to children from birth to 5 years old for 30 years and has given away hundreds of millions of them. That donation was part of the 26 million they gave away at the wedding, which I have talked about elsewhere and am not going to repeat. She said she was blown away and overjoyed. And then she made a joke that has been going around the internet for about 18 hours. She said, "It's evident that you two have made giving back a key part of your lives. So hey, when you have your firstborn, can I have it? Because that is going to be one special baby." And then, at the end, she sang, not a lot, a few bars, just the beginning of it, the way she has done it 1,000 times, in that voice. "I will always love you." She wrote that song in 1973. She wrote it as a goodbye. That is a documented fact about it, and she has explained it many times. It is a song about leaving somebody while still loving them, and she wrote it, and Whitney Houston sang it, and it became one of the most performed pieces of music in the English language. And in July of 2026, she used it to sign off a thank you video to a newly married couple. She wrote in the caption, "I wish you both the best, and know that I will always love you." 6 weeks. Nobody knew. I want to be extremely clear about that, because I have already seen people online reading things into it, and I do not think there is anything to read. She did what she did in every video she ever made, which is finish with a song. She had been doing it for 50 years. There is no message in it. There is no goodbye in it. There is a woman who was 80 years old singing 4 bars of her own song to 2 people who had done something kind, because that is what she did, every time, for 50 years. That is the whole thing. And it is going to be, I suspect, one of the last pieces of film of her that most people ever see, and it is going to be in a wedding thank you video, and I think she would find that extremely funny. I should say something here before I go further. I did not know Dolly Parton. I never met her. I was never in a room with her. I have no story about her, and I am not going to invent one. I am 73 years old, and she has been in my house since about 1974, which is a completely different thing, and I will get to it. Part 1. What she wrote. On Tuesday night, Taylor put out a statement. It went to Rolling Stone and Billboard and everybody else, and it is about 400 words, and I have read it 11 times since Tuesday. I am going to read you some of it, in her words, because they are hers, and I am not going to paraphrase a woman's tribute. She wrote, "A world without Dolly doesn't feel possible, real, or right." She wrote, "But because of the eternally generous way she spent her time on this earth, and the countless lives she changed for the better, her legacy will be an everlasting one." She wrote, "She was truly the gift that kept on giving." She wrote, "Dolly gave us someone to look up to while encouraging us to be who we are as individuals. Somehow she was able to give us her lessons about the world gently and honestly, simultaneously, and oftentimes hilariously." She wrote, "She managed to give the world the ultimate mystery and fantasy in some corners of her life, but to give full transparency in the ways that counted." She wrote, "Somehow she was true grace and true grit, all in one dazzling person." And then this one, which I read 4 times before I could go on. She wrote, "She possessed the softest heart when it came to the struggles of others, and a backbone of steel to defend her own self-worth as an artist." She thanked her for the melodies and lyrics she wrote that thawed even the coldest hearts. And she thanked her, and this is the line that has gone around the world. She thanked her for the tightropes she walked, so that young girls like me could grow up dreaming of joining the circus too. And then she ended it. 5 words and a name. Dolly, I'll think of you each step of the way. Part 2. What they were to each other. I want to put down what Dolly Parton actually said about my daughter-in-law over the years, because it is on the record, and because I think people have forgotten most of it. They never recorded a song together. That is the first thing, and it surprises people. 60 years and 20 years, overlapping, both of them Nashville, both of them songwriters, both of them women who wrote their own material, at a time when that was treated as unusual, and there is no duet. But they talked about each other for years. In 2023, at the iHeartRadio Music Awards, Dolly gave a video message about Taylor. She has praised her repeatedly in interviews, in that particular way she had of praising people, which was warm and slightly sideways, and never fawning. She talked about her writing. That is the thing I noticed going back through it. When Dolly Parton talked about Taylor Swift, she talked about the songwriting almost every time. Not the scale, not the tours, not the phenomenon, the writing. And Taylor said something about her in 2023, in a profile, that I went and found on Tuesday night. She said Dolly is a force of evolution and transformation in the industry, but that she does it with such playful levity, it almost looks effortless. I want to point at the word she chose. Almost. She did not say it looks effortless. She said it almost looks effortless. That is a 33-year-old woman who knows exactly what that costs, saying so in the most polite possible way. They had more in common than people think. Both wrote their own songs from the beginning, in a town that did not particularly expect it from young women. Both had a fight over their masters, Dolly's in 1974, Taylor's in her 30s. Both had a period where the industry decided they were finished. Neither of them ever left. And both of them built the entire thing on top of a childhood in a place nobody had heard of. Sevier County, Tennessee, Wyomissing, Pennsylvania. I looked at that list at about 1 in the morning on Tuesday, and I understood the tribute. She was not writing about a legend. She was writing about the only other person who did the exact same job. Part 3. 3 versions. I found out on Thursday how that tribute got written, and I want to tell you, because it changed how I read it, and I have now read it a 12th time. She wrote it in about 40 minutes. The news came out at about 4 o'clock on Tuesday afternoon her time, and by roughly 9 that evening it had gone to Rolling Stone and Billboard and the rest of them, which means she had a few hours, and she spent about 40 minutes of it writing, and the rest of it not writing. Travis told me this on Thursday morning, on the telephone, in the middle of something else, the way he tells me everything that matters. He said, "She wrote it 3 times." And I said, 3? And he said, "Yeah, but not like, she didn't rewrite it. She wrote 3 completely different ones." He said, "The first one was long." He said, "I didn't read it. She wouldn't let me. But she told me afterward, it was about 1,000 words and it was mostly about the songs." He said, "And she deleted it." I said, "Why?" And my son said, "Because she said it was an essay." He said, "She said, I've written an essay about a woman I loved, and nobody wants an essay." He said the second one was short. He said, "About 6 lines. She said it was the polite version. She said it was the thing you write when you want to say something and get out of the room." He said, "And she deleted that one too." I said, "What did she say about it?" And Travis said, "She said it was cowardly." He said, "Those were her words." She said, "That one's cowardly. It's just me getting out of the way." And then he said, "And then she did the thing." I said, "What thing?" And my son said, "She went and got the video." Part 4. She watched it alone. I want to correct something. I said earlier that she had not watched the July video since Tuesday, and that she watched it on Wednesday with Travis sitting next to her. That is what he told me on Wednesday, and it is what I believed, and it is not quite right. She watched it once on Tuesday night. Alone, before she wrote the 3rd version. He told me on Thursday, and he told me he had not known either. He said, "She told me Wednesday night, after." She said, "I watched it once on Tuesday before I wrote it." He said, and I said, "Why didn't you tell me?" And she said, "Because you'd have got on a plane." And he said, "I got on a plane anyway." And she said, "I know. That's why I didn't tell you." I want to sit on that for a second, because I have been sitting on it since Thursday. She did not tell her husband she had watched it, on the night it happened, alone, because she knew that if she told him he would immediately do something enormous. And he did the enormous thing anyway, without being told, 4 hours later. I said to him, "Does she know why you came?" And Travis said, "She knows I came." And I said, "That's not what I asked." And my son said, "Mom, I don't know why I came. I was at a facility, and then I was in a car, and then I was on a plane. There wasn't a decision in it anywhere." Part 5. The typo. So on Tuesday night she watched a minute of film of a woman who had been alive 6 weeks earlier, thanking her and my son for something, making a joke about a baby, and singing 4 bars. Alone. Once. And then she wrote the version that went out. He said, "She wrote it in about 40 minutes and she did not stop." He said, "She told me she did not read it back until it was finished, which she never does. She reads everything back constantly. That is the whole way she works." He said, "This one she wrote straight through, and then read it once and sent it." I said, "Was she crying?" And Travis said, "I wasn't there." Then he said, "She said she wasn't." Then he said, "She was." I said, "How do you know?" And my son said, "Because there's a typo." He said, "There's one word in it that is not the word she meant, and it is in the middle, and nobody has noticed, and she has not corrected it." He said, "And I have known that woman 3 years, and I have never seen a typo." He said, "Not one. Not in a text. Not in a note. Not in anything." He said, so I said, "There's a typo." And she said, "I know." And he said, "Do you want to fix it?" And Taylor Swift said, "No." He said, and I said, "Why?" And she said, "Because that's where I was." Part 6. Each step of the way. I want to talk about that last line, because it has been in me since Tuesday night, and it is not doing what I expected it to do. Each step of the way. Which steps? I sat in my kitchen in Cleveland on Tuesday night at about 11 o'clock and I thought, what steps has she got left? She got married 8 weeks ago. She has done the thing everybody spends their 20s and 30s working toward. And then I did the arithmetic properly, and I felt something go through me. Taylor Swift is 36 years old. Dolly Parton was married to Carl Dean for 58 years. I want you to sit with those two numbers next to each other, because I did, at a kitchen table, at 11 at night. 58 years. If my daughter-in-law and my son get 58 years, she will be 94. Part 7. Carl Dean. I am going to talk about him carefully, because the entire point of that man was that he did not do this. They met in 1964, outside a laundromat in Nashville. She was 18. He was 21. They married in 1966. He ran an asphalt business. He did not go to events. He did not do interviews. Over 60 years, there is a small handful of photographs. She talked about him constantly and showed him almost never. He died in March of 2025. 58 years. Part 8. Everything out, one thing in. Here is the architecture, and it is the reason I am making this. Dolly Parton gave the world everything except one thing. She gave the songs, the books, hundreds of millions of them, to children she would never meet. The outfit and the hair and the jokes and the whole magnificent construction of her, which she talked about openly as a construction because she thought people found it funny and she was right. And she kept Carl. That is not hiding. I want to be clear about the difference, and I did not understand it myself until Tuesday. Hiding is when you are ashamed of something. She talked about that man constantly. She wrote songs about him. She told everybody she had been married since 1966 and was very happy about it. She just did not show him. She decided, in about 1966, what was going to be the world's and what was going to be theirs. And she never once revised it in 58 years. Taylor said it better than I can, and she said it on Tuesday night. She said, she managed to give the world the ultimate mystery and fantasy in some corners of her life, but to give full transparency in the ways that counted. I have read that sentence about 15 times, and I want to point at what my daughter-in-law is actually describing. She is describing a woman who worked out, very early, what was hers. And I did not ask her about it, and I am not going to, but I want to say what a 73-year-old woman thinks and label it as a guess. My daughter-in-law has been married for 8 weeks and has not said one public word about it. Not one. Everything else is out there. The work, the songs, the 20-year retrospective she did last week. The marriage is not. She is doing the exact thing a woman from Sevier County worked out in 1966 and executed for 58 years. Everything out, one thing in. And on Tuesday, the woman who invented that architecture died at 80, 16 months after the one thing she kept. Part 9. What it costs. I have been married for 46 years, and Ed and I have kept nothing, because nobody has ever been interested in us, and until 3 years ago, we were 2 people in Ohio. So I do not know what it costs. But I have watched my daughter-in-law for 3 years, and I know one thing about it. It is lonely. Keeping something is not free. Everybody talks about privacy as though it is a possession, a comfort, a luxury famous people are lucky to protect. It is a job, full-time, no days off, and every person who does it alone, because the people around you cannot help you do it. The entire point is that they do not know. Dolly Parton did that job for 58 years. And then in March of 2025, the person she was doing it for died, and she was 80, and there was nobody left inside the thing she had built. And she said publicly that afterward she did not take care of herself the way she should have. I read that on Tuesday night and put my hand over my mouth in my own kitchen. Part 10. He got on a plane. I called my son on Tuesday night after I got off the phone with her. I said, "Is she all right?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Are you with her?" And Travis said, "I'm on a plane." I want to say something about that. The Chiefs cut down to 53 on Saturday. The season opens in 19 days. It is one of the 2 or 3 busiest weeks in the professional year of a man who plays that sport. And he is 36 years old, and it may be his last one. He got on a plane on Tuesday night. I said, "Does she know you're coming?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Travis." And he said, "Mom, I know. I know what she'd say." He said, "She'd say don't. It's fine. You've got the week." He said, "So I didn't ask her." Then he said, "I've done this once before." And I said, "Done what?" And my son said, "Got on a plane without asking." He said, "It worked out fine." He said one more thing before he hung up, and I want to give it to you exactly. He said, "Mom, she watched a video of somebody singing to us in July." He said, "And now it's the last thing." He said, "I don't want her sitting somewhere on her own watching that." Part 11. The Book Lady. I want to say what the Imagination Library actually is, because I have been saying the name and I do not think most people know. She started it in 1995 because her father could not read. Robert Lee Parton could not read or write. She talked about it for decades. She said he was one of the smartest people she ever knew, and that it embarrassed him his whole life, and that she watched what it cost him. So she started a program that sends a free book every month to a child from birth until they turn 5. No means test. No application beyond signing up. The book arrives in the post with their name printed in it. Their name on it. That is the part she insisted on. Hundreds of millions of books, 5 countries, 30 years. And she said that when it started, her father used to go with her sometimes, and people in the community began calling her the book lady. And she said that hearing her father hear somebody call her that was one of the proudest things of her life. Not the records, not the awards, not the money or the parks or the songs. Her father hearing somebody call her the book lady. I did not know the program existed until 2019. A woman I know in Ohio mentioned that the books came for her grandchild, and I said, "What books?" And she explained it at a kitchen table. And I said, "Who pays for that?" And she said, "Dolly Parton." And I said, "What, personally?" And she said, "I think so, love. I think it's just her." That is how most people find out. Somebody tells you at a table. 30 years, no advertising, and about half the people receiving them do not entirely know where they come from. Part 12. The Last Minute. One thing about that video, and then I will move on. If you had asked me on Monday what I would want the last widely seen film of Dolly Parton to be, I would have said something enormous. A stage. The whole apparatus of her. What it turned out to be is a woman at 80, at home, thanking 2 people for helping her give books to children, making a joke about a baby, and then singing because she could not help herself. There is not one thing in it that is about her. I have watched it 4 times looking. There is no career in it, no legacy, no mention of anything she has ever done. It is about a book program and 2 young people, and a joke, and a song. She spent her last widely seen minute on Earth talking about somebody else's kindness. Part 13. The Joke. I want to talk about the joke because it has become the thing everybody quotes, and I have seen about 400 people repeat it in 18 hours, and I do not think anybody has said what it actually is. When you have your firstborn, can I have it? Because that is going to be one special baby. That is a woman with no children of her own, making a joke about somebody else's. Dolly Parton did not have children. She was extremely open about it. She said many times that she believed she was not meant to, and that if she had, she would not have been able to do what she did, and that she made her peace with it a long time ago. And she called herself the aunt. That is a real thing. She was godmother to Miley Cyrus, and she has been described as an aunt figure by an entire generation of women in that industry, and she leaned into it completely. And she gave hundreds of millions of books to children she would never meet. So when a woman who chose not to have children makes a joke about wanting somebody else's firstborn 6 weeks before she dies, in a video about a children's literacy program, that is not a throwaway line. That is a woman telling you exactly what she did with her life. I have thought about that for a day and a half, and I want to say the thing plainly. She gave books to children she would never meet because she did not have any of her own. She turned it into the largest thing of its kind on this earth. Hundreds of millions of books, 30 years, in 5 countries. And she made a joke about it in July, to 2 newlyweds, and then sang, and then went about her day. Part 14. Philadelphia. Kylie called me on Wednesday morning. She said, "The girls got the books." And I said, "What?" And she said, "Imagination Library. All 4 of them are signed up." They've been signed up since Wyatt. I did not know that. 11 years I have been that woman's mother-in-law, and I did not know that my 4 granddaughters have been getting a free book in the post every month since 2019. I said, "Since when?" And Kylie Kelce said, "Wyatt was about 6 months old." She said, "Somebody at a thing told me about it, and I signed her up in the car park." I said, "Does Jason know?" And she said, "Donna, Jason has read them." She said, "He has been reading those books to those children for 6 years, and I do not believe he has ever once wondered where they come from." Then she said, "I told him on Tuesday night." I said, "What did he say?" And Kylie said, "He went quiet." She said, "And then he went and got the shelf." I said, "What shelf?" And she said, "We've kept them. Not all of them, but we've kept a lot of them. There's a shelf." She said, 6 years of books with 4 different children's names printed in them. She said, and he sat on the floor of a bedroom on Tuesday night and went through them. And I said, "For how long?" And Kylie Kelce said, "About an hour." Then she said, "And then he found the first one." She said, "The first one they send is always the same book. Every child, every country, 30 years. It's the same one." She said, "So we've got 4 copies of it. One for each of them." And she said, "He lined them up on the floor." I said, "What did he do?" And she said, "Nothing. He just sat there looking at 4 copies of the same book with 4 of his daughters' names in them." She said, "And then Wyatt came in." I said, "Oh no." And Kylie said, "Yeah." She said, "She's 6, and she came in and saw her father sitting on the floor of a bedroom at 9 o'clock at night, surrounded by books. And she said, 'What are you doing?' And Jason said, 'Looking at your books.' And Wyatt said, 'Why?' And Kylie said, and he said, 'Donna, he said the right thing, and I want that on the record, because he does not always—' He said, 'The lady who sent them died.' See. And Wyatt said, 'The book lady?' I want to stop here. A 6-year-old in Philadelphia in 2026 knows who the book lady is. Nobody told her. There is no branding on it in the way children notice branding. It is a book in the post with her name in it. She knows anyway." Kylie said, And Jason said yes. And Wyatt said, "Is that why there's a book?" And he said, "What do you mean?" And Wyatt said, "Is that why there's a book every month? Because she died?" Kylie said, and he had to explain that she'd been alive the whole time. She said, "That's the bit that got him. That's the bit that got me when he told me." She said, "My daughter has been getting a book every month for 6 years from a woman she thought was, I don't know what she thought." She said, she'd never once thought about the fact that a person was doing it. I said, "How did he leave it?" And Kylie Kelce said, "He said, she was a real lady, and she liked kids, and she sent you books because she wanted you to be able to read." And Wyatt said, "Okay." And then she said, "Do we still get them?" And Jason said, "Yes." And she said, "Even though she's dead?" And my eldest son said, "Especially now." Part 15, Tuesday afternoon. I know what the women my age did on Tuesday. You had a specific afternoon. Somebody sent you the news, and you said something out loud in an empty room, and then you sat down. And then you went and found something. A song, a photograph, in my case, a variety show from about 1978, that I had not thought about since 1978. And I sat in my kitchen in Cleveland and watched a 32-year-old woman in a wig sing on a stage in a television studio and cried like an absolute fool. Here is what I think that was, and it took me a day. It was not about her. I loved her, and I am sad, and that is real, but that is not what the crying was. It was about 1978. It was about a woman who was 25 in a house in Ohio with a radio, who has now been alive another 48 years, and who got put back in that room for 3 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon. That is what those people are for. Not icons in the sense the word gets used. The specific handful who were on in your house when you were young. They are load-bearing. Nobody tells you. You do not notice for 50 years, and then one of them goes and something in the structure moves. Part 16, Jolene. I said she has been in my house since 1974, and I want to be specific, because vagueness is a way of not saying things. I was 21 in 1974. I have talked in another one of these about that autumn and a situation I got out of, and I am not going to repeat it. But I will tell you what was on the radio. Jolene came out at the end of 1973, and it was everywhere in 1974. And I want to say what that song is, because I do not think younger people entirely understand why women my age respond to it the way we do. It is a song about a woman begging another woman not to take her man. She is not fighting. She is not warning her off. She is asking. She says please. The word please is in that song. And when I was 21, in a bad situation, with no money and no plan, that song came on the radio approximately every 40 minutes. I did not think anything about it at the time. I have thought about it a great deal since. Because that song is a woman with no power asking somebody with power to please not do the thing, and she does it beautifully and without 1 ounce of shame. There is not one line in Jolene where she pretends to be stronger than she is. I did not know how to do that in 1974. I got out of that situation by being extremely lucky and by 3 women in 2 rooms above a shop, and I have told that story elsewhere. But I never said please. Not once. Not in the whole thing. I have thought about that for 52 years and never said it out loud, and I am saying it now because a woman died on Tuesday who wrote a song about it when she was 27. I said that to Ed on Tuesday night. Not all of it. The Jolene part. And he did not say anything for a while. And then he said, 1968. I said, what? And Ed Kelce said, my father had the radio on. She was singing with Porter Wagoner, and I was about 15. He said, my father did not like anybody, and he liked her. Then he said, I have not thought about that in 50 years, and I thought about it 4 times today. Part 17. He got there. He called me on Wednesday morning. He had landed at some point in the night, and got to wherever she was, and I do not know where that is, and I did not ask. I said, "How is she?" And he said, "Better." I said, "What did you do?" And my son said, "Nothing." And I said, "Travis." And he said, "Mom, genuinely, nothing." I turned up, and she opened the door and looked extremely annoyed with me for about 4 seconds, and then she wasn't. He said, and then we sat down, and I said, "And?" And he said, "And we watched it." I said, "Watched what?" And Travis Kelce said, "The video. The one from July." He said she'd been avoiding it. She'd seen it in July, obviously, but since Tuesday she had not watched it back. He said, "Because it's been everywhere. It's on everything. You cannot open anything without it playing at you." He said, so she had not looked at it once since Tuesday, and it had been at her all day. He said, so we watched it, once, on a laptop, sitting next to each other. And I said, "How was that?" And he said, "Bad." Then he said, and then good. He said, "Bad because it's a minute of somebody being alive and funny, and she is not anymore, and that is the whole thing, isn't it? That's what it is every time." He said, and then good because of the joke. He said, "She makes the joke about the baby," and Taylor laughed. He said, "On Wednesday, 2 days after, she sat next to me on a sofa and watched a dead woman make a joke, and she laughed out loud." He said, and then she said something. I said, "What?" And Travis said, "She said, she's still doing it." I said, "Doing what?" And my son said, "I said the same thing." And Taylor said, "Making people feel better." "She's still doing it. She's been dead 2 days and she's still doing it," he said. And that was when it turned. He said, "She was fine after that. Not fine fine, but she got up and did things and ate something and answered about 9 phone calls." He said, "She watched it once with somebody sitting next to her, and then she was all right." I said, "Travis, that is why you got on the plane." And he said, "What?" And I said, "So she would not watch it on her own." And there was a pause. And my son said, "Yeah, I know." Then he said, "I didn't know that on Tuesday. I just got on the plane." He said one more thing before he hung up. He said, "Hey, Mom." I said, "What?" And Travis Kelce said, "She sang to us." He said, "I have been thinking about that since Tuesday and I cannot get past it." He said, "Dolly Parton sang to me and my wife." He said, "I'm a tight end from Ohio." Part 18. What he actually did. I want to describe what my son did for his wife between Tuesday night and Thursday, because he keeps telling me he did nothing, and it is the single most incorrect thing he has said all year. Here is nothing. He got on a plane on Tuesday night. During the week, his roster gets cut to 53, at 36 years old, in what may be the last season of his career, without asking her, and without telling anybody at the facility what he was doing. He did not call ahead. I asked him about that. I said, "Why not?" And Travis Kelce said, "Because she'd have said don't." Then he said, "And she'd have meant it, and she'd have been wrong, and I did not want to have to argue with a grieving person about whether I'm allowed to come." He did not bring anything. I asked. I said, "Did you take her something?" And he said, "Like what?" And I said, "I don't know. Flowers." And my son said, "Mom, she has got flowers. I cannot describe to you how many flowers there are." He said, "Everybody sends flowers. That's the first thing everybody does." He said, "There is no shortage of flowers in that house, and there is a shortage of people sitting on a sofa." He did not say anything about Dolly for the first 2 hours. That is the one I have thought about most. He said, I got there, and she was annoyed for about 4 seconds, and then she wasn't, and then we sat down. And I said, and then? And he said, and then I asked her about the dog. I said, the dog? And Travis said, we've been arguing about getting a dog for about 5 months. It's an ongoing thing. It's a whole negotiation. He said, so I sat down and said, right, the dog. I said, on Tuesday night, after she'd, and he said, yeah. And I said, Travis, that seems, and my son said, she needed a normal thing. He said, she'd had about 6 hours of everybody being extremely gentle with her. He said, everybody who called her that day used the same voice. You know the voice, the one people use. He said, and I did not want to be the 9th person to use the voice. He said, so I turned up at midnight and asked her about a dog, and we argued about it for about 20 minutes, and she called me an idiot twice. He said, and that was the first time she'd sounded like herself since 4 o'clock in the afternoon. I sat in my kitchen in Cleveland, listening to my son explain that he had flown 4,000 miles to argue with his wife about a dog, and I did not say anything for a moment. And then I said, Travis. And he said, what? And I said, your father did that in 1998. He said, what? And I said, when my mother died, your father did exactly that. He said, I don't remember that. And I said, you were 8. You were not supposed to remember it. I told him. I said, the day after she died, there were about 40 people in this house, and every single one of them talked to me in the voice. I said, and at about 9 o'clock at night, when they had all gone, your father came into the kitchen and asked me where the good screwdriver was. I said, there was a thing wrong with a door. I said, and he asked me about the door, and I told him about the door, and we discussed a door for 11 minutes. And my son said, and that helped? And I said, it was the only thing that helped for about 4 days. I said, I have never told anybody that, and I have thought about it every year since 1998. And there was a pause on that telephone. And Travis Kelce said, he never told me that. And I said, of course he didn't. He does not know he did it. And then he stayed. That is the other part. He was there Tuesday night, all day Wednesday night, and he went back on Thursday morning, on the first thing available, and was at the facility by the afternoon. 30-something hours. Nobody knew. There is no photograph of it. It did not happen as far as anybody on this earth is concerned, except about 6 people. I said, was it worth it? For 30 hours? And my son said, Mom? And I said, I'm asking. It's Cuts Week. You're 36. And Travis Kelce said, she watched a dead woman sing to us on her own on Tuesday night and did not tell me. He said, I'm not doing that twice. Part 19. What she left them. I want to end on what I think Dolly Parton actually left my son and his wife, because it is not the video, and it is not the song, and it is not the joke. It is the architecture. 58 years with a man almost nobody ever saw. An entire public life given away completely and cheerfully, and without reservation, for 60 years, at enormous scale. And one thing kept. That is not hiding. I want to be very clear about the difference, and I did not understand it myself until Tuesday. Hiding is when you are ashamed of something and you keep it out of sight. What she did is the opposite. She talked about that man constantly. She wrote songs about him. She told everybody who would listen that she had been married since 1966 and was very happy about it. She just did not show him. She decided, in about 1966, what was going to be the world's and what was going to be theirs. And she never once revised it in 58 years. My daughter-in-law is 8 weeks into a marriage and has not said one public word about it. I did not understand what she was doing until Tuesday night when I read her own tribute to somebody else and found the sentence, "Full transparency in the ways that counted." She has been studying. Part 20. Thursday. She called me on Thursday afternoon. I had not called her. I want to say that because I had decided on Tuesday night that I was not going to call her again unless she called me, and I held to it for 2 days, which was harder than it sounds. She called at about 3, and she said, "Has Travis told you everything?" And I said, "Probably not everything." And Taylor Swift said, "No, he wouldn't." And then she asked me to say something for her, which I told you about at the top of this, and which had never happened before in 3 years. I am going to give you the thing now. I asked her twice whether she was sure. She said, "I want them to know she was not sad about the not having children thing." I said, "What?" And she said, "I have seen about 9 pieces since Tuesday that have a certain shape to them." She said, "They say she gave books to children because she did not have any. They say the imagination library was a substitute. They say it kindly, and I do not think anybody means any harm." She said, "And it is not true, and I would like somebody to say so." I said, "How do you know?" And Taylor Swift said, "Because she told me." She said, "I am not going to tell you when or where, and I am not going to make it a story about me having known her, because I did not know her the way people are going to want me to have known her." She said, "We were not close." I want to be honest about that. We were extremely fond of each other, and we were not close. And if I sit here and turn it into a friendship, that is a lie. She said, "But she said it to me once, and it was direct, and it was not sad, and I have thought about it since Tuesday." She said she was not meant to, and that she knew it early, and that she was completely settled about it by about 30. She said, and she said the thing about the books afterward, and she said it as a joke, and the joke was not a cover. I said, "What was the joke?" And Taylor said, she said, "This way, I get all of them." I put my hand flat on my kitchen table. She said, "That's what she said." "This way, I get all of them," she said, and it was not brave, and it was not a consolation, and she was not making the best of anything. She said, "It was a woman who worked out what she was for, and then did it at enormous scale, and thought it was funny." She said, "So if you make one of your videos about her, will you say that?" And I said, "Yes." And she said, "Thank you." And then she said something else, and it was not for the video, and I am putting it in anyway, and she can be annoyed with me. She said, "Donna, everybody keeps saying she was like a mother to a generation of us." She said, "She was not a mother to anybody," and she said so about 100 times. She said, "She was the aunt." She said it herself. She called herself the aunt for about 40 years. She was godmother to one person and an aunt to everybody else, and that was completely deliberate. And she said, and I did not understand what that was until about 18 months ago. I said, "What changed 18 months ago?" And Taylor Swift said, "4 little girls started calling me Auntie Tay." She said, and I did not decide it, and nobody announced it, and it just started happening. And I have been trying to work out what the job is ever since. She said, and on Tuesday I realized there has been somebody doing that job at a scale nobody has ever done it, in public, for 50 years, and she died, and I had to write 400 words about her in 40 minutes. She said, "The whole thing about being an aunt is that nobody needs you." She said, "That's the job. You are the one who is not responsible for anything and therefore the only one they are not performing for." Then she said, and she took that and gave hundreds of millions of books to children she was never going to meet. She said, "I have got 4." She said, "I have got 4 children who call me that, and I have been treating it like a lovely accident. And she said, and on Tuesday I found out it is a job and somebody just retired from it. Part 21. For the people listening. I want to say two things and then I am finished. The first one is about the books. The Imagination Library is still running. It did not stop on Tuesday. If you have got a grandchild or a great-grandchild or a neighbor's child under 5, go and look up whether it operates where they live, because it operates in a great many places, and most people have no idea. It is free. There is no means test. The book comes in the post with their name printed in it. That is not a fundraising appeal, and I am not asking anybody for money, and I want to be extremely clear about that. I am telling you that a thing exists that a lot of people do not know about, which was the entire problem with it for 30 years. She built it so that a child in a house with no books would get one anyway. Somebody told me at a kitchen table in 2019, and I am telling you now. The second one is harder, and it is for the women my age. You have got 4 or 5 left. I said that earlier, and I did not want to say it, and I am going to say it properly now. There is a small number of people who were on in your house when you were young, not the ones you admired. The ones who were simply there, on the radio in the kitchen, on the television on a Saturday, in the background of a decade. They are load-bearing, and you do not know it, and then one of them goes. And here is what I want to say about it. Go and find the thing. On Tuesday afternoon, I went and found a variety show from 1978 that I have not thought about since 1978, and I sat in my kitchen and cried like a fool, and I want to tell you that it was one of the better hours I have had this year. Not because it was sad. It was sad. Because for about 3 minutes I was 25 years old in a house in Ohio. You do not get many of those. You get about 4 or 5 more, and then that is the whole account. So when one of them goes, do not put the phone down and go about your day and be sensible about it. Go and find the thing, and sit down with it, and let it put you back in the room. That is what they were for. That was the arrangement the whole time, and nobody told you. I'm Donna Kelce, Taylor Swift's mother-in-law. I did not know Dolly Parton, and I have no story about her. I know that in July she watched a video message get made for 2 people I love, and that she made a joke about a baby, and that she sang 4 bars of a song she wrote in 1973 as a goodbye and used in 2026 as a thank you. And that 6 weeks later she was gone at 80, 16 months after the one man she kept. And that on Tuesday night my daughter-in-law wrote 400 words about her and ended them with 5 words that I have not been able to put down. Dolly, I'll think of you each step of the way. On Thursday afternoon my daughter-in-law called me and asked me to tell 4 million women over 61 thing, because she has no way to say it that would not become a headline. She said Dolly Parton was not sad about not having children. She said she told her once, directly, and that it was not brave, and it was not a consolation, and she was not making the best of anything. She said the joke was, "This way I get all of them." And then she told me she has been calling herself somebody's aunt for 18 months without understanding what the job was, and that on Tuesday she found out it is a job, and that somebody just retired from it. There are a great many steps in front of that girl. 58 of them would take her to 94. I hope she gets every single one, and I hope my son is there for all of them, and I hope that at some point in about 40 years there are 4 women in their 50s in a kitchen somewhere in Pennsylvania telling somebody about their Auntie Tay. And I hope somebody still sends the books. Thank you for sitting with me today.